Ladies and gentlemen, we are witnessing a psychological epidemic. Men who desire the feminine yet despise its existence. They pursue relationships not out of love or growth, but conquest and control. These are not men, they are fractured mirrors, reflecting rage disguised as romance. These men often walk into a room and command attention. They carry themselves with confidence, dressed well, speaking fluently, presenting a version of masculinity that looks polished and powerful, but it is all surface. Beneath that image lies a fragile ego desperately holding itself together through performance. What appears to be strength is actually fear wearing a costume. These are not men at peace with themselves, they are men trapped in roles. They've built an identity around dominance, control, and validation, but inside there is chaos, resentment, and unresolved pain. Their masculinity is not real. It's not rooted in responsibility, respect, or maturity. It's built on an illusion that being a man means suppressing emotion, rejecting vulnerability, and conquering others to feel superior. This illusion is especially dangerous because it often goes unnoticed by society, by friends, and even by the women these men date. They've learned to mimic intimacy. They know the right things to say, the gestures to make, and how to be seen as desirable. But they don't know how to love, and more importantly, they don't want to learn. Love requires humility, and that terrifies them. To love someone means acknowledging their worth independent of your needs. But these men can't do that. Their internal sense of self-worth is so brittle that the mere idea of putting someone else first feels like self-erasure. They project confidence, but live in fear. Fear of being seen, fear of being known, fear of being insufficient. So instead of building an authentic identity, they overcompensate. They use their relationships as props to keep the mask in place. A girlfriend becomes a symbol, not a person. Her beauty is something to show off. Her opinions, something to correct. Her independence, something to diminish. He doesn't care about who she is, only what her presence does for his image. And that image is everything. Deep down, he knows that if the performance stops, the emptiness will return. So he keeps performing. He clings to control. He seduces, then punishes. He praises, then criticizes. He builds up only to tear down. This cycle is not random. It is survival. He needs to feel dominant because it's the only way he feels real. But it's a parasitic kind of existence. Instead of building strength from within, he feeds off the validation of others. That's not masculinity. That's addiction. And it's not just harmful to the women he entangles in this pattern, it's destroying him too. Every time he fakes strength instead of facing his weakness, he gets further from any chance of healing. Every time he dismisses vulnerability as weakness, he denies himself the possibility of real connection. The illusion might serve him temporarily, but it always collapses. And when it does, he will either break down or start again, with a new face, a new lie, and another woman caught in the crossfire. In the world of the narcissistic man, relationships are not built on mutual respect or emotional intimacy. They are built on leverage. Control is the silent, invisible foundation of everything he does. He does not seek connection because connection requires equality, and equality threatens his fragile sense of power. Instead, he seeks dominance. Every interaction, every conversation, every gesture is a subtle move in a psychological game of control. He wants to be the one who decides when you're close, when you're distant, when you feel loved, and when you feel rejected. He designs the emotional rhythm of the relationship, not for harmony, but for manipulation. What he fears most is emotional unpredictability. Real intimacy introduces uncertainty. If a woman has emotional depth and agency, she might disagree. She might have needs. She might challenge him. And that is unacceptable to a man who sees emotional openness as a loss of power. So he slowly reshapes the relationship to suit his need for control. He withdraws affection without warning, then offers it back when he senses her pulling away. He criticizes in subtle ways, planting seeds of self-doubt. He frames his dominance as protection, his control as care. And it works. At first, she may feel chosen, even cherished. But underneath the surface, he is carving away her independence, piece by piece. This isn't always loud or obvious. It's not constant shouting or overt aggression, though sometimes it is. More often, it's in the quiet dismissal of her concerns, the condescending tone when she speaks her mind, the way he makes her feel like she's overreacting whenever she tries to assert her needs. This is control through emotional erosion. Over time, she begins to question herself. She starts apologizing for things she never did wrong. She becomes smaller, quieter, more compliant, not because he asked her to, but because he trained her to. And he doesn't want a partner. He wants predictability. He wants someone whose emotional world he can dominate, someone who won't threaten his authority by having her own center of gravity. If she becomes too confident, too secure, too independent, he will react with withdrawal or punishment. He will accuse her of being distant, dramatic, or disrespectful, when in reality, she's just beginning to reclaim her voice. Ironically, this desire for control is rooted in his own inner chaos. Because he lacks emotional stability within himself, he tries to impose it on the external world. And because relationships are inherently unpredictable, they become a battlefield where he must always be in charge. But in seeking control, he sabotages the very thing he claims to want. He destroys trust, kills vulnerability, and turns love into a power struggle. What's most tragic is that he might genuinely believe he loves her, but his version of love is conditional. Love that only works when he's on top. Love that disappears when challenged. Real love doesn't require control. It requires courage. The courage to let someone be fully themselves without seeing that as a threat. And that's a courage he has yet to find. The root of this hatred toward women, buried deep inside the narcissistic man, is often not obvious, even to him. On the surface, he may appear flirtatious, even romantic, perhaps intensely drawn to women. But behind that attraction lies an inner war, a psychological conflict between desire and resentment. He wants women, but he doesn't trust them. He craves closeness, yet he fears vulnerability. And more often than not, this tension was planted long before he ever entered his first relationship. It was formed in childhood, shaped by the emotional dynamics he witnessed or endured. A cold, critical mother, an absent father, an environment where love felt like manipulation or neglect. From these early impressions, he learned to associate the feminine not with warmth and nurture, but with chaos, confusion, and danger. When a boy grows up in a space where the feminine is unpredictable, overpowering, or emotionally unavailable, he builds defenses. He learns not to feel, not to need, not to rely. He tells himself he must become invulnerable, and that vulnerability is weakness. Over time, this develops into a subconscious rejection of anything that reminds him of those early emotional wounds. And because he never healed that damage, he projects it onto women in adulthood. He doesn't see women as individuals. He sees them as emotional threats, reminders of pain, symbols of something that once hurt him when he was too young to understand or protect himself. This internalized misogyny isn't always loud or cruel. It can come across as sarcasm, superiority, passive aggressiveness, or even benevolent sexism disguised as protectiveness. He may speak highly of women in theory, but treat actual women in his life with disdain, skepticism, or quiet rage when they don't submit to his expectations. He may idolize the idea of the perfect woman, but quickly turn cold or critical once real flaws, needs, or independence appear. Because deep down, he doesn't want an equal, he wants control over the part of himself that once felt powerless. And he tries to do that by controlling her. The hatred is not just toward women, it's toward the parts of himself he has disowned. Softness, receptivity, emotional expression. He has buried these traits because he was taught they were dangerous, unmanly, or weak. And since he cannot accept them in himself, he cannot tolerate them in others. Particularly not in women, who often embody those very traits he's rejected. So he treats women with suspicion, condescension, or outright cruelty, not because of who they are, but because of what they represent to his fractured identity. He does not consciously choose this path. It is a reflex, a survival strategy that became a worldview. But until he confronts the truth of his internal conflict, every relationship he enters will be stained by resentment. Love will feel unsafe, connection will feel threatening, and closeness will trigger fear instead of comfort. The hatred is not just a defense mechanism, it's a cage. And unless he breaks the pattern, it will keep him emotionally imprisoned while hurting everyone who dares to get close. For the narcissistic man, romance is never about mutual discovery or shared growth. It is a calculated transaction. The gestures of affection, gifts, compliments, intimacy, attention are not expressions of love. They are investments made with an expectation of control. At first, he is everything she could hope for. Attentive, charismatic, full of intense interest. He listens, flatters, remembers the little things. It feels like being truly seen, but what she doesn't realize is that every compliment is a hook. Every act of kindness, a silent contract. You owe me now. He doesn't express this openly. In fact, he may seem generous, even selfless, but behind his charm lies a dangerous motive. He is not loving her. He is securing her compliance. He builds an emotional debt without ever admitting it. And once she's emotionally invested, the shift begins. Slowly, subtly, he starts changing the rules. What once drew him to her, her independence, her confidence, her spark, now becomes a threat. He begins to criticize the very traits he once admired. If she's outspoken, he calls her difficult. If she wants space, he accuses her of being cold. If she asks for more emotional openness, he tells her she's needy or dramatic. These aren't random reactions, they are deliberate tactics meant to destabilize her sense of self. When she questions his behavior, he reframes the situation to make her feel like the problem. In this dynamic, intimacy is no longer about closeness, it becomes a weapon. He might withhold affection as punishment or give it suddenly to regain control when he senses her slipping away. He turns emotional connection into a form of currency, always keeping her slightly off balance, always making her wonder if she's doing enough to earn his love again. This psychological push and pull creates a powerful dependency. She begins to doubt her instincts. She might even feel addicted to his approval because it comes in unpredictable waves. This is not love, this is exploitation. What makes this pattern so insidious is how convincingly it masquerades as passion. The highs feel euphoric, the lows feel like devastation. And because he is skilled at playing the victim when confronted, she often ends up apologizing for reacting to his mistreatment. He weaponizes guilt and pity, painting himself as misunderstood or emotionally wounded, drawing her into a cycle of trying to fix the relationship. In doing so, she surrenders more of her own needs, her boundaries, her voice. To the outside world, he may seem like a caring partner, but behind closed doors, he is engineering emotional dependence. He keeps her tethered by offering just enough warmth to make the coldness feel like her fault. And he does it with precision. Because to him, the relationship is not a place to be vulnerable or seen, it is a stage. A space where he performs the role of the desirable partner while extracting admiration, loyalty, and control in return. This isn't romance, it's psychological colonization. And by the time she sees it for what it is, she may already feel too broken to leave. One of the most painful parts of this dynamic is how long it can take for the woman involved to realize what's happening to her. From the outside, it might seem simple. Why doesn't she just leave? Why doesn't she see the red flags? But emotional manipulation by a narcissistic man is rarely obvious in the beginning. It starts subtly and it builds slowly. He doesn't come in with cruelty or control right away. He enters as the perfect partner, charming, attentive, even vulnerable. He makes her feel special, chosen, like no one else has ever truly seen her before. That early intensity feels like love, but it's actually the trap being set. As time goes on, the warmth she once felt starts to cool, and confusion replaces clarity. He begins to criticize instead of compliment, withdraw instead of engage, question her motives instead of honor her intentions. But every time she starts to pull away or question the relationship, he reels her back in with an apology, a dramatic gesture, or a sudden burst of affection. These moments of seeming sincerity reignite hope. She thinks, maybe he really does love me. Maybe I overreacted. Maybe if I try harder, we'll get back to how things were at the beginning. And that thought keeps her locked in. This is where the most dangerous psychological damage begins. When she starts to turn against herself. Because he doesn't usually scream or hit or threaten. Instead, he chips away at her reality. He makes her doubt her own perceptions, feelings, and instincts. This is classic gaslighting. She might express hurt, and he'll tell her she's too sensitive. She might call out something cruel he said, and he'll say she's imagining things. Over time, this erodes her confidence. She no longer trusts her gut. She becomes unsure of what's real and what's not. And in the midst of this confusion, shame takes root. She begins to think the failure of the relationship is her fault. She believes she's not enough, or that she's too much. That if she were more loving, less emotional, more understanding, he'd treat her better. But that's the lie she's been taught to believe. The truth is, no amount of love or patience can fix a man who uses control as a substitute for intimacy. The truth is, no amount of love or patience can fix a man who uses control as a substitute for intimacy. No amount of sacrifice can heal someone who refuses to face his own wounds. What makes this all even more tragic is how isolated she becomes. Friends might grow frustrated. Family might not understand. On the outside, he may still appear charming, making her look irrational if she complains. This isolation reinforces the belief that she's the problem, and it keeps her tethered even tighter. The cost of staying in these relationships isn't just heartbreak, it's the slow dismantling of self-worth. Her voice, her light, her sense of self becomes dimmed until she no longer recognizes the woman she was before. And the longer she stays, the harder it becomes to leave, not because she doesn't want to, but because she's been emotionally conditioned to believe she can't. Healing from this dynamic, whether you're the man causing the harm or the woman caught in it, requires a level of honesty most people spend their whole lives avoiding. For the narcissistic man, the first step is facing a truth he has likely buried for years, that his need to control, dominate, and emotionally manipulate is not a strength. It's a symptom of deep, unresolved fear. He has spent so long running from vulnerability that he has forgotten it's the very thing that makes real connection possible. Until he confronts the emotional wounds beneath his behavior, he will continue to repeat the same cycle with different partners, growing more bitter, more hollow, and more disconnected each time. That confrontation must begin with responsibility. Not excuses, not justifications, not vague reflections about toxic environments or bad past experiences, but real accountability. He must name the damage he's caused, not only to others but to himself. Because in avoiding emotional risk, he has also denied himself the chance to grow, to love, and to be loved. He must stop measuring his worth by control and start measuring it by his ability to show up authentically, even when it hurts. That kind of transformation is not instant. It requires therapy, self-reflection, and the humility to admit that what he thought was power was actually fear in disguise. For women, the path to healing begins with reclaiming reality. After months or years of gaslighting and manipulation, the most radical act can simply be to trust their own perception again, to believe their feelings are valid, to recognize that the confusion and pain were not because they were broken, but because they were being broken down. Healing means relearning how to hear their inner voice and trust it. It means realizing that love is not meant to be earned through suffering, that genuine intimacy never requires you to shrink yourself This process often begins in silence, in private journals, late-night realizations, or quiet moments of clarity. But healing deepens in community. Women coming out of these relationships need safe, supportive spaces where their experiences are believed and their boundaries are respected. They may also need to grieve not only the man they thought they loved, but the version of themselves they lost in trying to keep that love alive. And that grief is sacred. It's not a weakness. It's the beginning of rebuilding. Ultimately, healing is about transformation. For the man, it's about deconstructing the false self he built to survive and creating a new one grounded in truth, empathy, and courage. For the woman, it's about reclaiming her identity, her voice, and her power. Neither path is easy, but both are necessary, because when these patterns go unchallenged, they don't just destroy relationships, they destroy people. But when they're faced head-on, they become the raw material for something stronger. Self-awareness, resilience, and the possibility of real, lasting love that isn't rooted in control, but in mutual respect and shared humanity. This type of man does not want a partner. He wants a mirror that flatters. He sees women not as beings with souls, but as tools for self-confirmation. The tragedy is that he cannot love her because he has never made peace with himself. And the longer he hides behind charm, the more damage he does to those who dare to love him.